Hello, and welcome to Pragmatic Live, Pragmatic Marketing's webinar and podcast series where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product teams. My name is Rebecca Calageris. I am the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Pragmatic Marketing, and more importantly to you, the host for today's event. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. First, a recording of this webinar and a copy of the slides will be available afterwards. You'll be able to access them by the end of the day at pragmaticmarketing.com/live, and we'll also send out an email early next week with the link. Second, questions. We love questions. If you look to the left of your screen, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to enter any and all questions you have in that box, and we'll work hard to get through as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. Now, many of you are already familiar with Pragmatic Marketing, but for those of you who are not aware of us until today, welcome to the family. Pragmatic Marketing specializes in training companies and product teams on how to be truly market-driven. We provide techniques for listening to the market and gathering market facts, and then using those facts to shape strategies and drive execution. And we've been doing this and doing it quite successfully for over 20 years. Today's topic is distinctive competencies, what they are, why they're critical, and how you can use the voice of the market to help identify and validate yours. Helping us address this topic is Alan Armstrong, experienced product management and marketing executive, founder of the Toronto Product Management Association and principal of Eigenworks, and Paul Young, our very own veteran product team leader, instructor extraordinaire, and all-around good guy. So without further ado, here to get us started is Paul.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate the intro. Today we have a really exciting topic, distinctive competency. This is a topic that should always be in the back of your mind and help act as your guiding light when you ask, what does my company want to be? In order to get you there, on today's Pragmatic Live webinar, Alan and I are going to help you with 3 key objectives. First, we're going to put some definition around the term distinctive competencies so that you walk away with a crystal clear understanding of what it is. Second, we're going to help you understand how using your distinctive competencies can affect your company, business unit, and product choices, and what happens when you aren't aware of what they are, or worse, go against them. And third, we're going to outline a method that will help you figure out your distinctive competencies through the eyes of your buyers, so you can have an outside-in view of yourself. And as always, as Rebecca said, type your questions into the chat box and we will answer them as we go or at the end during Q&A. So let's get started. First, by defining what we mean when we say distinctive competencies. Many of you are already familiar with the term core competency. That basically asks, what are we really good at? Distinctive competencies are similar. In fact, they are a subset of your core competencies. A distinctive competency is, what do we do really well that most of the others in our market aren't as good at? It is your unique ability to create value. Think of your distinctive competencies as your DNA. What makes your company or business unit special? What sets you apart? What gives you advantages that others don't have? Distinctive competencies are more than just simply being different, because just being different doesn't necessarily create value. A good distinctive competency creates value, either value that you pass to your customers in terms of a lower price, better service, or more innovation, or that value could be captured and created for your owners or shareholders in terms of bigger margins, higher selling price, or stickier customers. Good distinctive competencies are things that you can leverage to give you advantages, such as cost advantages or service advantages. For example, you might have heard the story of Zappos. They have built into their DNA a complete focus on the customer. In fact, after your first few months at Zappos, the company will offer you a check to quit. In other words, they only want you there if you want to be there, and that reflects in their service. They leverage their total commitment from their employees to provide class-leading service to their customers. Those same distinctive competencies can serve to differentiate you from the competition and make your offering special. Finally, a good set of distinctive competencies raise strong barriers to entry against the competition. For example, Google has a strong distinctive competency in search. IBM has a strong distinctive competency in patents and intellectual property. Consequently, it's hard to compete against those companies in those areas. Last, we can't really talk about distinctive competencies without also talking about another box on the Pragmatic Marketing Framework called technology inventory, because they're intertwined. Technology inventory is an inventory of the technology assets that you have created that you can leverage in new ways. For example, you might have created a reporting engine for one product that you can leverage for another. Or maybe you can reuse one library for another purpose. So think of technology inventory as an inventory of the technology assets that you have that you can apply to solving market problems. What that means is that distinctive competencies are generally an inventory of the non-technical assets that you've got that you can also apply to the market's problems. They're often based in people, processes, or expertise. They are your DNA, and they're the results of what the geniuses at your company have created to make your company be all about. Because this is a new topic for many, let's look at distinctive competencies by looking at a couple of examples. One form of distinctive competencies might be innovation. For example, you could look at Stripe or Slack. They are both really innovative at taking complex processes like interoffice communications or payment processing and making them super simple. They've built their entire DNA around that innovation, and that's what sets them apart. On the other hand, Cisco has a distinctive competency in their industry for acquisitions. They've done well over 100 acquisitions and have it down to a science. As somebody who previously worked for a company that was acquired by Cisco, I can tell you that within a week of the acquisition closing, they airdropped their team of 50 people into our building, and within 2 weeks, everyone was converted to their IT systems, their HR systems, and their finance systems. It was clearly not their first rodeo. And they can do in weeks and days what takes their competition quarters and months to accomplish. That allows them to absorb innovative technologies through acquisition faster and get them to customers faster. Operational excellence is another example of distinctive competency. For example, Amazon has built an amazing set of processes and a body of knowledge about a worldwide shipping and distribution system. That's a huge barrier to entry. Walmart is well known for their operational excellence. In fact, they actually structure their contracts so that they are paid at the register for a product before they have to pay their supplier for taking on the inventory. That competency creates value to the buyer in the form of a lower price, but also value to the shareholder. Southwest Airlines is focused on standardization in their 737 air fleet so that it's easier to train and change out crews and replace broken parts, creating value in the form of on-time arrivals and better margins. Finally, customer intimacy is another type of distinctive competency that is really focused on putting the customer first. We talked about Zappos, but you could put Nordstrom's, BMW, Mercedes, or any number of other companies into this category who want to build their DNA around service. Tom's and Warby Parker build their competencies around a consciousness model with their buy one, give one culture. Having that as part of their DNA makes them different and authentic and special in the eyes of their buyers. Hopefully you are seeing how understanding the genius of your company and what makes up your DNA can inform your product choices and where you choose to invest. And hopefully you're also starting to ask, what are my distinctive competencies? So what happens if you don't know them? Or worse, what happens if you ignore them? Let's take a look. Going against your distinctive competencies is dangerous because it takes you away from what makes you great. Now, there might sometimes be a reason to do this, but it's rare. It's going to force you to build new competencies that you don't have today, which is expensive and risky. And worse, there's a good chance you might end up fighting your competitor on one of their distinctive competencies. And that's a recipe for failure. Finally, it can also create a big disconnect in your positioning. How do you think the market would regard Walmart trying to compete with Nordstrom's by introducing personal shoppers? Or Southwest Airlines trying to fly the Concorde internationally at $10,000 per ticket? It wouldn't make any sense. Those are silly examples to illustrate the point. But now let's look at some real-life examples of what happened when companies went against their distinctive competencies and what happened as a result. First, everyone points at Apple as a company who's had some amazing successes, and they have, but we also tend to forget that they've had a lot of failures as well. If you were to identify Apple's distinctive competencies, you would probably say things like innovation in user experience and design, or excellence in outsourced manufacturing, you probably wouldn't say that their distinctive competencies exist around building a social network. Yet that's exactly what they tried to do in 2010. Apple introduced a social network called Ping that was going to be their answer to Facebook. From the start, it had issues with spam accounts, availability in certain regions of the world, and mostly the fact that users didn't want yet another social network to manage. It was almost like Apple's distinctive competencies in hardware and software design didn't apply to social networking. In less than 2 years, Apple shut that product down and replaced it with Twitter and Facebook integration. Clearly, they went away from their distinctive competencies on that product. Now let's look at another example. If I were to come to you and say Colgate, most of you would think of the toothpaste company. Obviously, they have distinctive competencies around cleaning your teeth and manufacturing a product recommended by dentists, but not so much in ready-to-eat microwavable dinners. Colgate produced a line of prepackaged foods called Colgate Kitchen Entrees. The problem that it created was a disconnect in their positioning. People didn't think of Colgate as the company that they'd buy dinner from. Continuing that thing, what about Cosmo magazine? They have competencies in knowing what their audience wants to read about, creating eye-catching covers, and in distributing their product across a variety of retailers. But how about in yogurt? Yes, believe it or not, Cosmo once introduced its own brand of yogurt. I think this one speaks for itself. Apparently, within 18 months, it was on and off the shelf. And then finally, my favorite, Harley-Davidson, an iconic brand that knows a lot about creating exciting motorcycles, manufacturing in the U.S. at a profit, and how to create that very specific Harley sound from their engine. But what kinds of competencies does Harley have around making perfume? Well, clearly not any. This is brand extension gone way too far. And Harley customers apparently didn't want to smell like a motorcycle. Those are all kind of extreme examples of violating your distinctive competency. And while I've chosen some easy to understand B2C examples, the point applies to all business models. You must understand your genius, your DNA, your distinctive competency in order to make good choices about where to invest and to avoid disasters like these. And to get us to that understanding of our distinctive competencies, Alan Armstrong is going to show us some examples and a process about how to get there. Alan?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. And it's great to see all of you joining us today. I'm going to show you all a picture. I want to ask you all a question. I'm going to switch slides here. So if you look at these two pictures, I think you can see on the left a clear and decisive leader, and on the right a whole mess of competitors slapping at each other's arms and bodies and heels and everything else. And I want to ask, and maybe just have a little bit of fun with this today, which of these pictures most represents how you feel in your market? So on the left you have a clear leader, and you're the clear leader. On the right, it feels more competitive. So Rebecca, can you move to the poll? We're going to ask you to vote for left or right. So again, left, you feel like a clear leader in your market, and on the right, you're feeling like you're just competing against a whole sea full of competitors, and we want to see how this plays out. We've taken a little a bet on how this might play out. We want to see how you folks vote. Okay, we're getting close to about the whole crew voting here. So do you want to publish the results, Rebecca? We do that?
They're live, yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So what we're seeing here is it looks like it's actually great. We can see actual percentages. About 38% saying, feeling like there's a clear leader in the market, and about 61% saying that it's a highly competitive field. Well, I want to help you think through how to discover your distinctive competencies. And I'm going to turn the lens on B2B, because I know that most of the people who are dialing in here are dealing with B2B markets. And it's great to talk about these products with which we can relate very tangibly, but many of us work in products that most of our friends don't even understand. So I wanted to talk about a product in a market that is obscure even to many of us in technology, which is the storage industry. So storage, even if you know about enterprise infrastructure, storage is still a sort of arcane and hived-off area with its own specialized language that sometimes serves even to keep people out as much as it does to keep people in. So I think if we can ask the question in storage, can a storage company differentiate? We can look at how each of us can try to shift a little bit more from that highly competitive marketplace to one where we know what our distinctive competency is, and we can translate that into a differentiated offering. So to do that, I want to tell you about my friend, Jeff Cobb. Jeff and I worked together in San Francisco Bay Area about 10 years ago at a company called Wiley Technology, another enterprise infrastructure company. And Jeff, about 2.5 years ago, joined a company called Cumulo, where now when I knew Jeff 10 years ago, Jeff was, the engineer's engineer, the smartest guy in every room, and it did not depend on the room you were in. He was the smartest guy in the room. When Jeff, a few years later, joined Cumulo, he joined a team who is, in fact, one of the world's leading teams in building out something called scale-out network-attached storage. So Jeff came in and looked around and found that he was actually probably the least technical guy, but he was in charge of product management. And Cumulo knew at that time, about 2.5, 3 years ago, that they had the best team in the business at building a storage solution. They knew that that was a distinctive competency. But they also knew that there were going to be other teams out there building scale-out storage, building next-generation infrastructure products. And so they knew they needed to develop a second distinctive competency, which was listening to the market. So when Jeff joined, he formed a team of product managers, a very small team, maybe 2 or 3. They had a UX person, an interaction design person, and they actually hired a full-time business development rep, an inside salesperson who was responsible for getting in touch with every single person they could in the market to talk to them about storage. What is the life of a storage administrator? How is it changing? How is it evolving? Over the course of 2 years, Jeff told me they conducted over 600 interviews, and those interviews were attended by 3 of the senior executives in the company. This is a company that is taking customer development very, very seriously. There's a whole great backstory about how they ran this program, splunking through LinkedIn, looking for connections, looking for initially anyone who would talk to them, and separating them out and saying, who are these users? What are they doing? And trying to find the common theme. Now, I'm going to come back here and talk about how this turned out for them. But I want to talk to you about this idea of genius and how it relates to distinctive competency. My belief is that every company has a genius embedded in it. And I'm not talking about a single person at the company. It should never rest on a single person. It's a genius of something that you are uniquely capable of doing. So that could be, as Paul pointed out earlier, in operations, in customer intimacy, and so on. And what typically happens in most of the companies that we are part of is that genius or distinctive competency is used to develop a product which we then market and then we sell. But as we've seen, 60% of the folks on this webinar alone are still finding themselves in a relatively undifferentiated space and feeling like they're grasping for every deal that they can get their hands on. And so what Jeff demonstrates and what I'm going to propose for you is that we need to reorient this picture. And so what we need to move to the front of this cycle is a deep, rich, regular, voluminous conversation with buyers in the market. And what we want to do is to use the distinctive competency, or if you can also imagine it, what is the genius of our company or this distinctive competency, and then go out and discover the buyers and the buyer themes, and then use the buyer themes to ask our genius, to ask our distinctive competency in our company to solve market problems. And that process will produce an understanding of a pervasive, unsolved problem in the market, which when we develop a product and we market it and sell it, will translate into a differentiated offering. So I want to tell you how this turned out for my friend Jeff and his crew. The folks on the screen are the senior executives of Cumulo, and they were also, except for Jeff, the founders of a previous storage company called Isilon. They took that genius of building the Isilon product and added it to this customer discovery piece, and then asked this genius team to build a product that solved an unsolved and pervasive problem, and that is this. Every storage administrator that they talked to, or in fact every company that they talked to, said that all of the ways that they had been using to manage storage were absolutely breaking down when storage was going to scale. So we're going from gigabytes to petabytes of scale. And what Cumulo came to market with was not just cost, efficient build-out of storage, but the ability to actually know what the data is and how it's acting, and therefore make management kinds of decisions over the data. So they built what is called the world's first data-aware scale-out storage. Now, I spoke to Jeff just this week. They've just recently launched, after that massive effort of both product build and customer discovery, and he said that the market wants almost more than they can deliver right now. They are the demand for their product and their differentiation is far exceeding even their hopes. And so this process has actually done that. It's produced a differentiated offering. Now I'm guessing that most of you don't have the same kind of opportunity that my friend Jeff had. And so I want to address the question of what can I do, what can you do if you're not able to start from scratch? Many of us join a company and we have the product that we have the team that we have, and we can only change so much in so much time. So I'm going to outline 2 steps that you can use to.
Ladies and gentlemen, the conference will begin momentarily.
Oh, we seem to have a technical difficulty. Paul, are you still on the line?
I am.
Okay, I think we've lost Alan.
So he'll be back in a second. He's about to get back on the line here.
Okay. We do have a question. You want to? We could talk a little bit about the question while we wait for Alan to get back on.
Yeah, I'm happy to help that.
Okay, sure. In the mid stages of a company, how do you think a company can identify distinctive competencies outside of buyer interviews?
Yeah, so distinctive competencies and the topic of how do you discover it, I want to answer in 2 ways. One, when Alan gets back, he'll take us through a process of how to do that. But distinctive competencies are a little bit about, what do we want to be when we grow up? And so the first step to figuring that out is to figure out what are we good at today. And so there's a inside the company process that we have to go through that says, let's all sit down, let's get in a room, start on a whiteboard, and let's make a big list of everything that we have that are assets that make up our DNA today that we believe are things that not everybody else in the industry has. So that could be your expertise in certain areas. That could be the processes that you've developed and knowledge that you've developed over the years. Maybe it's your company culture, like the Zappos example that I gave earlier, and you've got an intense, almost insane focus on the customer. What are things that you have that make you different? And from the perspective of the outside in, then we might go test those with the market to say, hey, what do you think? Why do you do business with us? In your mind, the buyer's mind, what makes us special and why would you buy from us? Oftentimes people think that the reason they win deals are the fact that they have the lowest price or the fact that that their salespeople are the best or whatever. But when you actually go have those conversations, oftentimes you find that it's not all about price. It's about something else, like your reputation for service or your or another reason altogether. And that's really what understanding your distinctive competencies is all about. And if you're a mid-stage company, you're trying to figure this out for the first time, first thing I would do, pull my team together, get them into a room, make a big inventory of things that we can then carry out into the market and run some tests on.
Hi, Paul. I'm back. We had an audio issue here.
No worries. I'll let you take that.
Okay. Thanks. So I was just about to say I'm going to talk about a two-step process here. So let's jump in and talk about step one. And I think, Paul, this is something like what you were alluding to. So I want to present this in two steps because you really can't fix all of that at once. So if you arrive at a company where it looks like the whole field is fairly undifferentiated, you need to make some stepwise progress. So the first thing we recommend is looking at win interviews. So I'm going to suggest going out and doing 10, 20, 30 win interviews. I run a win-loss company, and a lot of companies call us up and say, we want to know why we lose. And that's true. Of course we want to know why you lose. But actually, I think your real question is, how could we win more? And that's not just a semantic change. That's a significant difference. So the first thing to do is to start with your own strengths and go out and curate a set of discussions with buyers about why they chose you over your competitors. You will get a great list of your strengths, and you'll get a great list also of your competitors' weaknesses. This is the beginning of discovering the market's perception of your distinctive competency and your differentiation. Next, I would use that against a similar size batch of loss interviews. And in the loss interviews, what you want to do is to do a little bit of what-if analysis. So what if the things that we had found in the win interviews were applied in this situation? Or what if we changed this or that? And I don't want you to look for things like, what if we dropped our price? Although that's an interesting question in itself. But what we're trying to do is what if we solve this problem in a different way? Okay. Now we've done thousands of those kinds of interviews for many customers, and I've put together a few examples of the kinds of things you will discover if you go out and do this kind of analysis. The first one is that you can win on usability if you focus sales and demos on use cases that are relevant to the buyer, that is buyer-centric use cases. So let me tell you what I mean by that. We had a client where we were noticing a significant difference in the success, their win-loss ratios, in different parts of the field. And what we found out, and it was a really interesting insight for them. So in one territory, they were losing significantly because the product was perceived as hard to use. In another territory, the same product was being sold to a very similar demographic of customers, And they were winning substantially because the customers saw it as the most easy to use product. So it's the same product in similar markets, but being presented by different kinds of people. What we identified was that the successful territory was doing a discovery of what the customer was trying to achieve, whether the customer was mature or relatively new to their market, and then tailoring their sales presentation and demos in fairly simple ways. It wasn't like they had to just completely present a different product. It was a fairly simple kind of tailoring to show how those customers could be successful with use cases 1, 2, and 3. Especially for an immature customer, you show up and just show all the buttons on your product. It can be totally overwhelming, and they cannot picture themselves being successful with that. So that company rolled out a whole retraining process, and they saw their win rates go from something like 40% to something like 65% over the course of 6 months by just unifying that approach to presenting the product in a way that helped the buyers achieve the kind of use cases that they were after. So that's a pretty massive impact they were able to have. And they found that they actually have a differentiation in usability. The second thing is that if you listen for use cases in your win-loss interviews, it will help you better segment your market so that you can find market segments that are more interested in your product. And that, again, will feed that conversation with the distinctive competency of your company so that you can create differentiated products for those segments of the market. So I want to tell you a story about a company that has a mobile security application. So this company had this just great technology, fantastic technology. They were sure that it was better than everyone else's. But it was the same kind of swimming situation where they were very, very competitive, and win rates were not impressive. What we discovered was that we did some win-loss for them. They were winning very significantly in a couple of market segments. One was nurses in a hospital, and the other one was local law enforcement. So police stations, especially in large districts, where they have a lot of mobile devices spread over a lot of territory, and they need to manage the security and updates of those things. And yet, this company, they sort of had these diamonds in the rough. They had these excellent examples of wins where they so clearly were getting traction, but they were giving the same presentation to both of those segments. So what we helped them do, and actually they did most of this part on their own, we did the discovery on this stuff, is they began running marketing campaigns and sales campaigns specifically against local law enforcement and specifically against hospitals, and specifically chief nursing officers and IT administration inside hospitals. They had an increase in their marketing effectiveness, where they used to have to generate like 1,000 inquiries to get a single sales qualified or sales accepted lead. They drove that down to 30 to 1. So they went from 1,000 to 1 to 30 to 1 in those segments by just discovering where they had relevance. And then they were able to iterate and use the genius, the distinctive competency of their company in distributed mobile security management in very targeted segments and develop features for those markets. I'll give you a third example. The third example is that if you are able to find these areas of differentiation, our somewhat unscientific results on this say that you can command approximately a 20% price premium if you are able to articulate a differentiated message and a differentiated offering. So if you can add 20% to your top line, you will blow the bottom line out of the water. It has a huge impact on your overall profitability as a product. So those are some of the benefits you can get from just doing your own win-loss analysis. I really believe these are things that you all can do yourselves, and there are lots of resources out there to help you do that. Once you kind of, as I like to say, sort of plug the holes in the boat and maybe got some quick wins, if you're starting to deliver more and more results by just fixing sales and marketing. Sales and marketing are like the fastest and best things to start fixing. But ultimately what we want to do is to recraft our product and our offering so that what we're delivering is a differentiated product. So once you've got those wins behind you, then you can start to invest in deeper and more conversations with buyers. And again, I want to come back to this idea of we have our internal distinctive competency, and then we want to understand, we want to develop and curate a rich understanding of who the buyer is, what they need, what are the technology trends, the legislative trends, 5 forces of the market, you name it. We want to understand that. And then we want to use that buyer information and go back to the distinctive competency of our company and say, solve this problem using our distinctive competency, and we will have this differentiated product. And so as product marketing people and product managers, I want you to be curators of market problems, and to use those problems, you want to feed those problems back to the engine of distinctive competency of your company. It's not your job to solve those problems. It's your job to bring those problems back and show why they're important. And that requires a deeper level of discussion with customers. And I still think, there are different ways of engaging customers here. So win-loss analysis is a very powerful one. Renewal analysis or churn analysis, also very powerful. We could also look at potentials, customers who are in your market but haven't bought yet. But what I want to have with those customers are a deeper conversation. So I'm not going to be talking to them. This is something also that Jeff Cobb spoke about. So often the difficulty in these interviews is that users and buyers will react to what they have. So they'll say, this is the old buggy whip, faster buggy argument. But you have to steer away. You need to consciously steer the buyers away from that discussion. I never start an interview by talking about what you didn't like or did like about the sales process or the product. What we want to know is almost like a day in the life of your buyer. So what are the things that they check in on first thing in the morning when they wake up? Jeff talked about that in the storage world. There was a great example that he gave, and I'm going to use that example here to demonstrate this. So what they found is that storage administrators would wake up in the morning and find out that when they left on Friday, everything was fine, storage was fine. They come in, they wake up Monday morning, and all of their storage is used up because somebody did something over the weekend, but they couldn't possibly figure out who did what. So they would literally send a broadcast message to the entire team saying, delete whatever data you could possibly delete, which of course causes a massive amount of wasted time as people trying to delete data. They don't know what to delete. They don't want to delete things. What if I lose my work, etc. And that specific discovery translated into an audit capability so that their storage product is data aware. So they can say, oh gosh, this is what happened on the weekend. That job ran and it generated all that stuff. If that stuff's not needed, we can dump it right now and get the whole team off and working again. So again, you want to look into these like the visceral experience of the buyer and the user. What kind of notifications do you dread receiving? What scares you about where your company is going? Will you be able to be successful with your job as your company progresses? And to be able to do that, I present you, and this we'll wrap up after this. I present you the model. It's based on the Harvard negotiation project, which talks about how people make decisions. And people make decisions, and when they tell the salesperson why they chose what they chose, they talk about the top of this pyramid. That's the stance or the position that they arrive at the end of a decision-making process. So that's where you get an example like price. Your product is too expensive. But what's really going on is way below that surface. And so as a product marketing person, you need to drill down into context and politics. So things like, was this champion that was working this deal able to get something done? What was the financial environment there? And then even better, go down into the value and understand the person who's evaluating and how they're going to derive value and become successful or not with what they're being presented. So it's about going from the final position that they arrived at and diving down and understanding more about their lives and their jobs and what's going to make them successful, what they're afraid of, what they're excited about. And if you can do that on scale and understand those buyer problems, you can pull out ahead. It is possible to transform. It's a long and it can be a difficult process, but it is a very empowering process. And I want you to picture yourselves like that swimmer. I mean, look at that confidence. Look at that red cap. Look at that out in front. So I hope this will help you get there.
Excellent, excellent. We have a bunch of questions, and I would encourage people to continue to send them in. The first question is for Paul. It is from Tony. Is a distinctive competency only relevant at the brand or company level, or can you have a distinctive competency at the brand and company level, and then also at the product and or even feature level?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the quick answer is both, but most likely what's going to happen is that your distinctive competencies are something you want to think of as a set of assets that are laying around your company in terms of culture, DNA, people, processes, and so on that you can apply towards building better products and services and making better products and services choices. And so typically what I see is that the assets that we have laying around the company manifest themselves in features that differentiate our product down the road or our service down the road. For example, over the years, to go back to my Harley example from earlier, over the years, Harley has developed this corporate culture and this a body of organizational knowledge that lets them know what their buyers are after with regard to like a rugged, well-sounding motorcycle. And so that leads to a feature like a Harley that is so loud it causes you to go deaf. And so that's an example of where a feature gets generated from the distinctive competencies and DNA that the culture has built over time.
Excellent. And I have a question from Dan. Can you provide some resources for learning how to do win-loss interviews and reach those underlying reasons?
Alan, why don't you take that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, we have a wealth of articles I've written about how to do this. And by all means, get in touch with me. I'd be happy to send you a digest of that. Yeah, that would be the best. That would be the best suggestion. I also on my website you have links to all of that stuff. So check out our blog.
And there's also and I believe there's also a set of resources, Rebecca, that we have on pragmaticmarketing.com in the Pragmatic Marketer magazine specifically. So if you go to pragmaticmarketing.com and type into our search bar win-loss analysis, you'll find a whole set of resources that we provide on that. And if you're an alumni, you can go to our website, log into the alumni, download the templates for win-loss interviews, which will give you a good starting point to get going.
Excellent. All right, we have a Question from Artug. Some companies try to invest in areas outside of their comfort zone. For example, Google is working on a self-driving car. At what point do you think a company can take these risks that are outside of their known distinctive companies, and how do they kind of guess if it's the right move?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, I always get a little bit cautious when using examples like Google and Apple because they're so huge that we could kind of point to anything. But Google is a really good example. They have a lot of experiments going on. Google Glass, self-driving car, all sorts of stuff. Google Wave was one that didn't work. But they're also in a very unique position because they have this enormous cash engine called search that spins off billions of dollars that allows them to experiment in all these areas. And they're really good. They've actually built it into their distinctive competency culture to drive those kinds of experiments. They were one of the first people to do the 20% time thing with their engineers where they can take 1 day a week to go work on something that's outside their core job. And so this culture of experimentation is a distinctive competency for Google. And as to the question of when is it appropriate for a company to go outside of their distinctive competencies, I think of a couple of scenarios where it would be appropriate. One, you're trying to either disrupt an industry that you're not in or avoid getting disrupted in the one that you are in. And you're like Google, you have a really well-established cash cow position in the industry that you're currently dominating that allows you to run those kinds of experiments. That would be one scenario. Another scenario would be one like IBM found themselves in the late 80s, early 90s, when they realized that their existing distinctive competencies were not going to serve them well in the future. So you think about IBM circa 1980s, mid-80s, they were still considered to be the mainframe company. And they had built up a lot of competencies around building and servicing mainframes. And the old joke was that when you bought an IBM mainframe or server, an engineer would jump out of the box with it. But what they realized was that the world was moving away from those competencies and it wasn't going to serve them well. And so Gerstner and other CEOs of that time started to make a conscious effort to shift their distinctive competencies away from what they were and to a new set of distinctive competencies that they had to invest in building around services. And now IBM is thought of more as a services company than they are a mainframe company as a result. But it doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a lot of energy and effort and resourcing and executive attention to make that conscious shift. Sometimes I describe distinctive competencies like the tectonic plate system, because it moves slowly. Unless you acquire another company, your distinctive competencies generally won't change overnight. Walmart can't change overnight from the company that's known for giving you the lowest price to the customer intimacy personal shopper company competing with Nordstrom's, because distinctive competencies are baked into your DNA, and it takes a little while to change those.
Great. I have a question I think it would be wonderful if you both weighed in on. When do you find it optimal to do win-loss interviews on your own versus using a third party such as Eigenworks?
All right. Is it okay if I start off that one?
Sure.
So that's a great question. And my answer might surprise you folks. I would say you should do it yourself if at all possible. The information that you're going to get is incredibly rich, and if you can do that, if you can dedicate the kind of staff resources that it takes to do it and do it right, I think it's a fantastic thing to do internally. I think the reason that people come to firms like Eigenworks is that they find it very, very difficult to do themselves. It's the tyranny of the urgent is sort of the status quo in a lot of companies, and so there's always a lot of things to do and spend your time on, and so it's difficult to allocate the time. But if you could do it, you should. The second reason why you might want to use an outside firm is that sometimes customers are less likely to be honest with you, particularly in the case of losses. And particularly in the case of something that we look at is stuck deals. So in the case of losses, we talk about losses often like a relationship ending, relationship breakup. And it's like, it's kind of hard to be honest with the person that you're leaving behind when there's a lot. It's just a fairly uncomfortable kind of situation. And so particularly in those cases, it's much more likely that they're going to open up to a third party. The third reason to go outside is that there is an actual skill involved in doing this and doing this really well. So I think it is a good kind of, I would call it a kind of distinctive competency to aim to develop internally. I think it's a really, really good thing. When I was doing product management, we did our own win-loss analysis. So it is something to aim for. But, not every company has that skill right away or immediately. And it takes time to develop, and it's not always something that you can make a priority. So, but the most important thing is that you're getting the information, you're consuming the information. I would say it would be better to outsource it so that you get it rather than not do it at all and sort of fool yourself that you're going to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I'll give you sort of the benefits and drawbacks of both approaches. I agree with everything Alan said. Obviously, doing it yourself, you develop a skill that is needed. So for your own career, it's a great skill to have. If you do it yourself, one of the benefits over doing it through outsourcing is that you have a set of knowledge and a body of knowledge about your product, but also about the history of this product and service within your company and how you've done sales in the past and so on that could serve you as you have those conversations. The person you hire to go do this, you're going to have to teach them that stuff, or they're going to have to learn it, and so it might take them a little longer to spin up. The other thing is that anytime you hire somebody to go do something for you and go do research on your behalf, and you will then receive the research that they've done, it goes through their filter. And so, it's like the old telephone game that we played in kindergarten where we whispered all the way down the line, and what came out at the other side was different than what you heard in the beginning. Every time something goes through somebody's filter, things change just a little bit. Might be inconsequential, might not be. And so that's why I'm a big fan of getting it from the horse's mouth. But I agree completely with Alan that getting it from a third party is better than not getting it at all. And if you don't have the time to do it because you're busy, if you have the money to spend on an outsourced third party, they might be more willing to talk to a third party, like Alan said, than they would be to talk to you. In fact, I've seen that a lot. And so those are all good reasons to hire it out if you don't feel like you can or have the desire to do it yourself.
I think I'd like to add one thing to that, Paul. I agree with what you said. There are other situations where there's a lot of conflict inside a company. And so in a sense, no matter who you are, you're never sort of a neutral third party. So we get calls from a lot of senior executives who want us to basically kind of come in as the truth teller so that, there's no sort of messenger dispute internally. So if we can come back with, raw data and good quotes from customers and buyers, it helps them use that as like no blame. We're not going to blame anybody, but we're gonna fix the problem. And then it can kind of give some credibility to the effort internally that might not exist if you do it yourselves.
Great answers from both of you. Okay, we have time for one more question, and this one is from Brock. How do you get companies who purchase another product to talk to you? Win calls are easy, but lost calls are harder to schedule, especially in a litigious climate.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I can take that one. We do dozens of those every week. So the real answer is that most people who have walked away have, I feel like they carry some kind of psychological burden that they would actually like to unburden. And so the key is to tap into that. And one of the mistakes that people make when they're doing lost calls in particular is to somehow almost like to handle the objections that the person has in the call. So the way we approach lost interviews is, and also I will say, I think that people are just more comfortable unloading on a third party for that kind of thing. So our response rate actually on losses is not too different than it is on wins. We get about 75% of people from a list to respond to actually schedule and conduct a 30-minute debrief. We get tons of detail in that amount of time. So I think it's particularly just positioning it to them as it's not a sales call. We're not trying to change your mind. The other thing that we constantly message is that, as our client, you are aiming to lead the industry, and you are treating this as an investment in learning from your mistakes and learning from the strengths of others. And for the most part, buyers in a market are pretty open to helping a market succeed because it's a little bit of self-interest there as well. So if they think that they can have an open and free conversation and unload that sort of burden, because you did actually give them something of value, most likely, and they would like to give something back to you. But as long as it's sort of no strings attached, and you're not going to get they're not going to get drawn into trying to, be convinced of, getting the relationship back together, as it were.
So it would be fair to say when you show up, you say, hey, look, not trying to restart the deal. We're just trying to learn how you came to your decision. We want to learn that so that, this market can be even more competitive the next time you're out there shopping. Setting it up something along those lines.
You got it.
All right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Excellent. And we are ending right on time. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, Paul and Alan, for today's presentation. Remember, our webinars tie back directly to our Box of the Month initiative, where we highlight a different topic from the framework each month and provide extra information, insights, and implementation guidance in that area. Next month's box is profitability, and we've lined up a great presentation from Jim Senek about how to effectively price software products in a way that both delights customers and increases profits. So be sure to join us Tuesday, June 9th for that presentation. That does it for this edition of Pragmatic Live. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the week.